These Violent Delights, Chapter 19. I'm worried. Can you blame me? Lady Kai pulled the brush through Juliet's hair, frowning each time she hit a tangle. Juliet was certainly old enough to manage this herself, but her mother insisted. When Juliet was a little girl with hair that grew down to her waist, her mother used to come into her room every night and brush it until all the knots were gone, or until Lady Kai was at least satisfied by the state of her daughter's head, which occasionally included the thoughts within it too. Now that Juliet was back for good, her mother had reinstated the practice. Juliet's parents were busy people. This was her mother's way of still having some role in her life. No matter what it is in this city, there are too many people invested, Lady Kai continued. Too many people with personal stakes. Too many people with too much to lose. Her frown deepened as she spoke, both in accordance with the words coming out of her mouth and in frustration with her task. Juliet's hair was bobbed now. There was not much left to brush, but it was still a struggle to work through all the remnants of product that Juliet heaped on every day to maintain her curls. Mama, you will have more to worry about if... Juliet winced as the brush went through a clump of gel that hadn't washed out. The madness spreads to every corner of the city. Our dwindling members are more of a cause for concern than the toes I step on while sticking my nose into communist business. Dwindling numbers in the Scarlet Gang. Dwindling numbers in the White Flowers. Their blood feud was nothing compared to both gangs dying out, yet Juliet seemed to be the only person who believed this madness potent enough to sweep the rug out from under everyone. Her parents were too proud. They had grown too used for situations they could control, adversaries they could defeat. They did not see the situation as Juliet did. They did not see Elisa Montagava trying to tear her own throat out every time they closed their eyes, as Juliet did now. The girl was so young. How had she gotten caught up in all this? Well, Lady Kai sniffed, it is inevitable that you shall step on some toes. It is simply that I would prefer you send men with you while you're doing so. Juliet bristled. At the very least, her parents were taking the madness seriously now. They still did not think it required their personal interference, or rather, they did not see how they could possibly be of any help when it came to a disease that had people tearing out their own throats. But they cared enough to officially put Juliet to the task, excusing her from her other duties. No more chasing rent. Juliet was a one-woman mission for the truth. Please do not assign me an entourage, Juliet said, shuddering. I could outfight them in my sleep. Lady Kai glared at her through the mirror. What? Juliet exclaimed. It is not about the fight, her mother replied firmly. It is about image. It is your people having your back. Oh, God. Juliet could immediately sense the incoming lecture. It was an innate ability of hers, like how some people sensed incoming storms by the ache in their bones. Don't forget, your father has been overthrown once or twice during his time. Juliet closed her eyes, sighing internally before forcing them open again. 4 years had passed, and her mother still delighted in recounting the story as if it taught the greatest life lesson known to mankind. When the despicable Montagav avenged your father's death by killing your grandfather, her mother said, your father should have been the one to lead next. Lady Kai pulled the brush through another knot. Juliet winced. But he was even younger than you are now, so the businessmen removed him and decided one of their own would have the final say. They dismissed him as nothing but a boy, and said that if he wanted to lead with no reason save his bloodline, then he should join the monarchy instead of the gang. But then in 1892, Juliet interrupted, taking over the story with theatrics. With the people on the streets of Shanghai directionless and running amok, with both the Scarlet Gang and the White Flowers taking over by irrelevant associates, while the rightful young heirs were shoved to the background, they at last revolted. Juliet snapped her mouth shut upon seeing the deathly glower her mother was giving her through the mirror. She grumbled an apology, folding her arms. She admired her father's ability to climb back to the top, just as she could detachedly acknowledge that Lord Montagav, who had also been uprooted when his father died, was intelligent enough to do the same. Except in this period of time, while both gangs were led by men who cared not for bonds and allegiance, only efficiency and money, the blood feud has been at its quietest. Your father, Lady Kai said sharply, tugging on a strand of hair, reclaimed his rightful title when he was older because he had people who believed in him. He appealed to the common majority. those who you see protecting him now, those who you see willing to give up their lives for him. It is all a matter of pride, Juliet. Lady Kai ducked her head, passing her face against her daughter's, until they were both staring ahead in the mirror. He wanted the Scarlet Gang to be a force of nature. He wanted membership to be a badge that declared power. The commoners in the gang could think of nothing else more desirable, and behind him, they toppled the businessmen who had no choice but to accept their subservience. Juliet raised an eyebrow. In summary, she said, it is a game of numbers. You could say that. Her mother clicked her tongue. So don't start believing that skill is all it takes to stay on top. Loyalty plays its dirty hand too, and it is fickle. It's a fickle, ever-changing thing. With that, Lady Kai set down her brush, squeezed Juliet's shoulders, and said goodnight. Brisk, quick, and abrupt. That was her mother. She strode out of Juliet's room and shut the door behind her, leaving Juliet to mull on those parting words. The rest of the world didn't see it, but while Lord Kai was the face of the Scarlet Gang, Lady Kai did as much work behind the scenes, running her eyes through every piece of paper that passed into the house. It was Lady Kai who had convinced her husband that a daughter would be far more capable of leading the Scarlet Gang next, rather than a real male relative. So Juliet had been given the crown, and Lord Kai expected the gang to bend at the knee when Juliet became the head one day, out of expectation, out of blood loyalty. Juliet leaned toward the mirror, touching her fingers to the lines on her face. Was it loyalty that created power? Or was loyalty only a symptom, offered when the circumstances were favorable and taken away when the tides turned? It helped that Lord Kai and Lord Montagov were men. Juliet wasn't naive. Their every messenger, every errand runner, every lower-tiered but fiercely loyal gangster was male. Most of the Scarlet Gang feared and revered Juliet now, but she was not in control yet. How would they react when Juliet tried to exert true power over them? Would she have to shed all that she was, ditch the glittery dresses and wear suits to be listened to? Juliet finally pushed away from her vanity table, rubbing at her eyes tiredly. The day had worn on for far too long, yet her body felt restless instead of weary. When she collapsed onto the blankets atop her bed, her nightgown was sticky against her skin. She could hear her heartbeat thudding, and with the longer she lay down there in the dark, the thudding only became more intense, until the sound was playing through her eardrums. Wait. Juliet bolted upright. Someone was knocking, rhythmically, on the glass doors of her second-floor balcony. No, Juliet said aloud dully. The knocking came again, slow, purposeful. No. More knocking. Ah! Juliet clambered to her feet and stormed toward the sound, opening the curtains with more force than necessary. As the fabric settled, she found a familiar figure seated casually on the railing of her balcony, his legs swinging and his body backlit by the glow of the crescent moon. She swallowed hard. Really? Juliet demanded through the glass door. You climbed my house? You couldn't have simply thrown a few pebbles? Roma looked down into the gardens below. You don't have any pebbles. Juliet rubbed her eyes again, forcibly this time. Maybe if she rubbed hard enough, she would realize this was all a fever dream, and she'd wake up peacefully alone in her room. She removed her hands from her eyes. Roma was still there. They really needed to upgrade their security. Roma Montagov, this is unacceptable, Juliet declared tightly. This was all too reminiscent, too wistful, too much. Leave before you get shot. Even with his face shrouded in the shadows, Roma managed to convey a frown that reached Juliet with maximum effect. He looked around, seeing no one in the gardens below him. Who will shoot me? I'm going to shoot you, Juliet snapped. No, you're not. Open the door, Dorogaya. Juliet jerked back, horrified by the command, but not by the command, but by his term of endearment. With delay, Roma seemed to realize, too, that what had slipped out. His eyes widening a fraction, but he didn't fumble or take it back. He merely stared at her in wait, like he hadn't just pulled out a relic from their past, one that had smashed to pieces. The door stays closed, Juliet said coldly. What do you want? Roma hopped off the railing, his shoes landing on the balcony tiles with a soft thud. When he came up close against the glass, Juliet noted a deep scratch marring his jaw, and she wondered if he'd stumbled here right after a fight. It was almost enough to have her reach for a gun and really send him running. But then, quietly, Roma whispered, "I want to save my sister." Something inside of Juliet came loose. Her hard eyes softened, the smallest of fractions. "How is Elisa?" she asked. "They've tied her up at the hospital like some asylum patient," Roma replied. His eyes were focused on his hands. He kept slipping them over, palm back, searching for something that wasn't there. She tried to go for her throat again when she regained consciousness, so they injected her with something to keep her asleep. They've been keeping her asleep until there's some way to cure this madness. Roma looked up. There was a madness and desperation in his own eyes. "I need your help, Juliet. All the trails from my end have gone cold. There's nothing else I can chase, nowhere I can go, nowhere I can call. You, however, I know you know something." Juliet didn't immediately respond. She stood there unmoving, wrestling with the pit in her stomach, and realizing she was uncertain if this feeling was still hatred or fear. Fear that if the madness went on, she too would find herself in Roma's position, watching someone she loved die. Fear that by mere consideration of Roma in such a sympathetic manner, she had crossed the line. The problem with hatred was that when the initial emotion weakened, the responses still remained. The clenched fists and hot veins, the blurred vision and quickened pulse, and in such remains, Juliet was not in control of what they might develop into. Like yearning. "You ask me for help," Juliet said quietly. "And yet, how much blood is on your hands, Roma? In the time was gone, how many of my people asked for your help, for mercy, right before you shot them?" Roma's eyes were wholly black under the moonlight. "I have nothing to say to that," he answered. "The blood feud was the blood feud. This is something utterly new in itself. If we don't help each other, we may both die out." "I am the one with information," Juliet warned, her skin prickling uncomfortably. "Try to refrain from making sweeping generalizations about us both." "You have information, but I have the other half of the city," Roma countered. "If you act alone, that's half of Shanghai you cannot work with. If I act alone, I cannot enter any Scarlet territory. Think, Juliet, when the madness is hitting us both, there is no telling in which territory the answers will be found." A chill swept through her room, bitter and cold and correct. Juliet tried to ignore it. She forced a laugh, the sound hard. "As you're proving right now, I don't think a lack of permission is stopping you from prancing into my territory." "Juliet!" Roma pressed his hands against the glass. His pleading stare was utterly unguarded. "Please, she's my sister." "God!" Juliet had to look away. She couldn't bear it. The heaviness twisting her heart was undeserved. Any vulnerability that Roma Mozgov showed was an act, a carefully constructed facade he would bide his time with until the chance came to strike. She knew this. But perhaps Juliet would never learn. Perhaps her memories of Roma would pull her toward ruin, unless she reached into her own chest and ripped out all remains of softness. "For Elisa," Juliet managed roughly, finally turning her gaze back. "And for all the little girls in this city falling victim to a game they never asked to play. I will help you. But do your part, Roma. I help you, and you help me find the solution to this madness as quickly as possible." Roma exhaled, breathing relief and gratitude onto the glass. She watched him carefully, watched the tension of drain from his shoulders and the terror in his eyes meld into hope. She wondered how much of it was true and how much of it was for her benefit, so she would think she was making the right decision. Deal. This could ruin her. It could ruin everything, but what mattered now was not Juliet, nor her feelings. It was finding a solution. If the possibility of saving her people meant risking her reputation with them, then it was a sacrifice that she had to take. Who else would make it? Who else but Juliet? "Okay," Juliet conceded quietly. She supposed there was no going back. "I have Zhang Gutai's home address. My next move was breaking in and rummaging around, but She shrugged, the gesture so forcefully casual on her part that she almost believed it. We can go there together to begin, if you wish. Yes, Roma said. If he nodded any harder, his head might roll off. Yes. Tomorrow, then, Juliet decided. Suddenly, the memories of their past together, the one she had spent 4 years trying so hard to forget, came barreling into her mind with full force. She had no choice but to invoke them, ignoring the clenching tightness in her lungs. Meet me at the statue. The statue, a small stone rendering of a crying woman, was a forgotten artifact hidden in an unnamed park in the international settlement. 4 years ago, Roma and Juliet had stumbled upon it by chance and spent an afternoon trying to work out its intentions and origins. Juliet had insisted it was Niobe, the woman in Greek mythology who had cried so much after her children were slain that the gods turned her to stone. Roma had maintained it was La Llorona, the sleeping woman in Latin America folklore, who cried for the child she had killed. They had never decided on an answer. If Roma was surprised or taken aback by her reference to the statue, he didn't show it. He only asked, "When?" "Sunrise." It was only at that which Roma appeared mildly concerned. "Sunrise? That's ambitious." "The earlier the better," Juliet insisted. She winced. "It reduces our chances of being seen together. This goes without saying, but no one can know we're collaborating. We would both be dead if they knew," Roma finished. "I know. Until sunrise, then." Juliet watched him swing his legs back over the railing of the balcony, hanging along the elaborate metal designs like another piece of the sculpting. Before a low hanging light in the room, Roma was a black and white study of sorrow. Roma paused. "Good night, Juliet." Then he was gone, his lithe shadow working quickly down the exterior wall and darting through the gardens. One jump and he was over the gate, off the Scarlet Gang's grounds and on his way back to his own world. Juliet drew her curtains tightly, adjusting the fabric until not a sliver of silver was shining through. Only then should she allow herself to admit a long exhale, pushing the moonlight out of her room and its changing faces out of her heart.